I'm now very proud to start this 2025 edition with an Italian, of which I've been a fan for many years. So I'm very happy of having made sure that you all can enjoy Alessandro on the stage this morning. I've always loved his content because he manages to create content that anyone can understand, even though he's extremely technical in the aspects. They are always been very useful. Me, myself, in my life, I've always watched his videos regarding some topics to make sure that I could understand them deeper. So I'm going to leave the stage to you, Alessandro.
Thank you very much. Okay, I just do one test. Okay. Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone. In this speech today, I'm going to explain to you that when you think about ZK proof, or in general, like ZK technology, you think about like math and complicated math, like really complex math. But in reality, I mean, it's really complex math. But the high level, it's very easy, and everyone can understand ZK proof. And so today, I'm going to teach you that you could have invented ZK proof if you just have one problem. And if you need to solve this problem, then you probably would have invented ZK proof yourself. So let's start. The first actor is Paul. Paul is an entrepreneur, and he has spent a lot of money for buying a lot of computational power. So basically, he bought a lot of computers, GPU, ASIC. And he did that because he has one job. His job is called the partition problem. So what he has to do, he's given a list of numbers, and let's call this list S. So in our example, S contains 1, 1, 5, 7. And what Paul has to do, and this is his job, like for earning money, he has to do this job. To do this job, actually, his job is to find S1 and S2, which are two subsets of the initial list S, such that the sum of the items of S1 equals the sum of the items of S2. In this example, if you can see, 1 plus 1 plus 5 equals 7. So S1 and S2 in this example satisfy the constraints, and so they are the solution for the partition problem given the initial list S. And basically, Paul has to do this job. So he's given S, and he has to find S1 and S2. And you may think this is very easy, but that's easy just because S is very small. This is actually a very hard problem. The partition problem is called an NP problem, which means non-polynomial problem, which just means it's very hard to do. Okay? And so this is why Paul has spent a lot of money into buying computational power, because if he didn't have this much power, he wouldn't be able to find S1 and S2, okay? So that's why Paul spent a lot of money. Okay, and this is called the partition problem. Now let's introduce another actor, an actress, Veronica. Veronica is a Polish woman. So her job is to make sure that Paul does his job correctly and doesn't lie. And what I mean is essentially Veronica has to make sure that S1 and S2 that Paul finds are actually a solution for the partition problem, okay? And this is her job, like she's a Polish woman, so she just has to make sure Paul doesn't lie, and makes his job correctly. And so, how can Veronica verify that Paul does his job correctly? Okay, this is the first question we have to ask. They discuss a bit, and then they find the first solution. Let's just send S1 and S2 to Veronica. So Paul finds S1 and S2, and then sends S1 and S2, which is the solution, to Veronica. And then, with S1 and S2, Veronica can verify that they satisfy the constraint. Because the hard problem is to find S1 and S2. But if you already have S1 and S2, it's very easy to verify that it's correct and it's a valid solution. And that works. I mean, this protocol works because Veronica is able to verify that Paul has done his job correctly. But You know, can we do better? Because Paul is not happy. Veronica is happy, but Paul is not happy because Paul has spent a lot of money into buying computational power, and then he has to give away his solution for free. And if he gives the solution to Veronica, all his competitors now know the solution, and they can just use the solution he found without spending all the money, right? And so Paul said, can we do better? Because I don't like this protocol. I don't like the fact that I spend my money and then everyone in the world have my solution. And so let's try to slightly change the partition problem in a way that let Paul find a different way to make sure that Veronica is also happy, but Paul is also happy. So our partition problem can be also explained in this way. So we have the initial list S, and then instead of the solution be S1 and S2, the solution can be A, which is the satisfying assignment. And we have three constraints. The length of S must equal the length of A, in this example 4 items for both. All elements of A must be 1 or minus 1. And then the dot product, this I times S is the dot product, must equal to 0. The dot product is essentially the multiplication between the first item of S for the first item of 1 plus second item of S times second item of A. We can do this 1 times 1, 1. 1 times 1, 1, so 1 plus 1, we are 2. 5 times 1, 5 times 2, so we are 7. And then 7 times minus 1, minus 7 plus 7, 0. So that A satisfies all three constraints. And so that means that A is a solution, is a valid solution for the partition problem. So we just tweak the problem. Instead of the solution being S1 and S2, and the constraint being like the sum of all the elements of S1 must equal the sum of all the elements of S2, now the solution is the satisfying assignment A, and the constraints are these ones, okay? Same problem, I just tweak the problem a bit because this is more helpful for what we need. And now, Paul, after finding A, which is the solution, I repeat, also create W. W stands for the witness. And W is very easy to calculate, is the partial sum of the dot product between S and A. Essentially, I'm going to create W with you. 1 times 1, 1, and so the first element is 1. Then we have the second element, 1 times 1, which is 1, plus the element before, which is 1, so 1 plus 1, 2. And then we have 5 times 1, which is 5, plus the element before, which is 2, so 5 plus 2, 7. And then again, 7 times minus 1, minus 7, plus the element before, which is 7, so 7 minus 7, 0. And then what we do is just shifting all the elements of W to the left, to the right. And then the last item becomes the first one. Okay, so we have W, 0, 1, 2, 7. Okay? This is also quite easy to do. I mean, Paul doesn't have to do a lot of job, because if Paul finds A, it's trivial to go and create W. And it's very interesting, like why did we create W? Why Paul created W? Because there is a very useful property between S, the initial list, and W, which is this one. The absolute value of an item of S is equal to essentially the items where the index is summed with 1 minus the same item of W. So let's do one example. It's very easy. Let's say I equals 1. So S of 1 is 1. Let's remember that when you say S1 is not the first element, is the second, because S0 is the first, S1 is the second, so we have 1. Equals to W of I plus 1, which is I of W of 2, and W2 is 0, 1, 2, so it's 2. Minus W1, which is 1, so 2 minus 1 is 1 equals 1. And this holds true for all the I. You can try, okay, but we don't have a lot of time, so just trust me. And so right now we have a new protocol that lets Veronica verify the work that Paul did. Let's see this in practice. So S is the initial list, so anyone, everyone knows S. Instead of Paul sending the entire solution to Veronica, let's Veronica ask Paul for 2 consecutive numbers. In this example, 0 and 1. And then, what Paul does is sending to Veronica W0 and W1. So essentially, Veronica sends 2 numbers, 2 consecutive numbers, and Paul sends the value that W has in those numbers, okay? And then Veronica can make sure that this property holds, okay? This property here. If it does hold, then it means that Paul did his job correctly. But the good property now is that Veronica doesn't know the solution A. It does know W, but W is not the solution, okay? There's like there are 2 different things. So we are very good right now. But there is still one problem. How can Veronica make sure that Paul is not just sending 2 random numbers that satisfy? No. Okay. How can Veronica make sure that Paul is sending actually W0 and W1 and not just 2 random numbers that, you know, satisfy this assignment, this constraint? Because Veronica here doesn't have any element so that he can trust Paul, okay? So Paul needs to do one more thing. Needs to do a commitment to W before the protocol begins. And for example, we can use a Merkle root to commit to all the elements of W. So we have our W, and we put all the elements of W in the leaves of the Merkle tree, and then we create the Merkle tree, and we generate the Merkle root. The Merkle root is our commitment, is the commitment that Paul does to all the elements of W. And so now the protocol is the following one. So before even the protocol begins, the shared knowledge that both Paul and Veronica knows is S, and the Merkle root of the commitment of all the elements of W. That's very important. And now, it's equal to it's the same protocol as before, but there's a difference. When Paul sends back W0 and W1, he also sends back the Merkle path. It is essentially the way that Veronica can verify that W0 and W1 are actually part of the commitment. And with this kind of protocol, what we achieved is that Paul has done his job, which is very computational expensive, and he has spent a lot of money into make sure that he's the only one that can do that. And Veronica, which is a Polish woman, can still verify that Paul does his job correctly without knowing the solution. And that's the perfect solution for both Paul and for Veronica that has to make sure Paul is in line. So that's the perfect protocol. And essentially, we started with a problem, and since we did have to find a solution, because that could be a real-life problem, not just a mental problem I'm explaining to you, okay? That's a real problem. Like, complex math, complex cryptography isn't created just for the fun of the math. It's created because there are problems, and to fix and to solve those problems, you have to think a lot, right? And then you can find solutions such as these ones. Of course, this is a simplified version. There are like other things that Paul and Veronica has to do in the perfect ZK-proof protocol, but that's just, the high level of a ZK-proof protocol. And so, yeah, we are going to announce that later, so I don't want to spend too much time on it right now, but you can find me on YouTube and on X as Alessandro Mazza. You can just search for me. And yeah, thank you for your attention. If you have some questions, even in Italian, that's okay, but in English, that's fine. For example, you could imagine, but that's hard. What's the problem in this protocol? But that's a hard question. But you can try to say, what's the problem with this? Sorry, what's the? Okay, there are a lot of them, but let's just be in the Ethereum ecosystem, since this is ETHMilan. For example, right now there's one big problem. you cannot run an Ethereum node in your cell phone. And the reason for that is that it essentially takes too much storage, you know, like 2 terabytes, even more, even 12 terabytes for some nodes. You need to have a very good connection, internet connection. You have to have a lot of computational power, like a very powerful CPU. And most iPhones, even the most powerful iPhones, isn't suited for that. But with ZK proof, you can imagine a situation where you have like strong actors that builds all the blocks, and together with building a block, they also create a ZK proof, and they send both the block and the ZK proof. When you receive the block, right now, all the nodes re-execute all the transactions inside the block so that they can make sure that, you know, this block is valid. But with ZK proof, instead of re-executing all the transactions, you can just verify the proof. And you can imagine the verification of the proof is much, much faster and doesn't require all the computational power that re-executing all the transactions take. So with ZK proof, and this is actually the direction we are going toward, you can, for example, there's a very cool website from the Ethereum Foundation, I think it's called ETHproof.org, where you can actually see like where we are in terms of, you know, technology, because we are not there yet, but we are going very fast. And so yeah, you can imagine, you can, in 5 to 10 years, you can have your Ethereum node in your cell phone, because you don't need to re-execute transactions, and still you don't trust anyone. I mean, you're trusting the technology, the cryptography of ZK proof, but we are already trusting cryptography for, you know, digital signatures, so that's fine.